This is Mark chapter 13, verses 14 through 27. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything out. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created until now and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, "Look, here's the Christ," or "Look, there he is," do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. When I was young, my family and I used to like to go and see buildings or houses that were on fire. A weird hobby, a weird thing to do together, I know. And even looking back, it feels more weird. But we live on a hill in a town called Rochester, and that hill overlooks looks straight towards the town of Beaver. So from our hill, if there was a fire in the town, we'd see smoke rising, and then we'd be interested. I remember me thinking, like, wow, I hope there's a fire. Meanwhile, it's a terrible thing for the people on the other side. But on my side, there was this hope and expectation and excitement, which makes me feel kind of bad now, realizing that it led to people losing things. For some reason, I just didn't put those two things together. But I remember getting to one scene specifically, to one fire, and the house was just completely engulfed in flames, and it was terrible. And I think that's when I realized this wasn't a good thing. And I started to think, they must not have been able to take anything out of there. What were they able to take with them? From what I remember, they took their cats, and that's it. And it made me start to think, what would I take with me if my house or my apartment were burning down? What would I go and reach for? What would be the one thing that in my haste and in my hurry I would want to take with me? It's probably the thing I treasure most. And I've continued thinking about that. I have this fear, this worry, if my house burned down, right? And it's a terrible scene. There's a terrible scene when something's being completely destroyed, when things that have been worked for or gathered are just completely disappearing in front of your eyes. And I wish that the scene that we're given for the last days was a little more happy, a little more joyous, a little more ideal or picturesque, right? But unfortunately, it's a pretty terrible scene. It's kind of like a house fire. You get there, and there's things are just going away, and things aren't as they ought to be. It seems it's terrible. It's a terrible scene. To give examples, it speaks of an abomination of desolation, which I don't know about you, but that does not sound like a good thing. It sounds terrible. It also says that there's fleeing, right? People are fleeing from something. They're in a hurry, they're in haste, they're afraid. It says to not turn back, to not go into your houses. It says that it'll be difficult for those who are pregnant and nursing infants. It says there will be tribulation. It says the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light and the stars will be falling from heaven. Guys, is this what we have to look forward to? If this is what we have to look forward to, what are we doing? Is this worth it? Things are disappearing. People are losing things. It's dark. Does this sound good? Does this sound like Jesus is coming again? He actually assures us, yes, this is it. That's how you'll know. It's not when people will come and make claims that he's coming again, right? So often we as humans like to control the idea of even who Jesus is or what God is doing. We want God to come at certain times. We want him to come when things are hard. But when things are easy, Jesus, give us a couple more years and then come. Let me get married, right? Let me have a family, raise a family, and then you can come. But how terrible is the thought of Jesus coming right in the middle of some things that we're looking forward to, or before things we're looking forward to. That can feel really scary for us. It can feel like suffering. That can feel like loss. But Jesus here is trying to show us that this is a great scene. It's something to be celebrated. However, the celebration isn't all going to look as we want it to. It's not going to be all what we expect. We would expect it to be the sun opened up and there were rainbows everywhere and everything was living in harmony. And it does get to that point, but it doesn't introduce the great news. Can't be a reality until we understand how terrible the bad news is, right? And this is the gospel. It tells us that the good news of Jesus dying on the cross is good precisely because of how bad the bad news is. And the bad news is our sin. The bad news is a deep pit of sin within us, within not just me individually, but us corporately as a people, right? Made in the image of God, lost our way. So that means so many things have been impacted by this. It means that we use our power to rule over people. It means that we want to feel like the best. It means that we don't want certain people to have the same chance as us. It means that we don't see people as we ought to. It means that we don't treat people like they're made in the image of God. We have prejudice, we have pride, and we have struggles with knowing and admitting those things. And often it's really hard for us to admit that. I have that same struggle. The bad news is very bad news. The bad news is our sin. There's bad news here as well. And honestly, without this bad news, I don't think the coming of the Son of Man, I don't think Jesus coming again would sound so great. Because if there wasn't bad news, what would we have to look forward to? If it was all good news, then would we want Jesus to come back? Would we invite his coming? It has to be bad in a lot of ways. But Jesus does assure that he'll come again. It says, then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And this is good news, that Jesus is going to come again. And when he does, it will be with great power and glory. That this will be a moment where we may be standing in the middle of something terrible, but our relief and our reward has come. And that's in the form of a person, Jesus, and not just momentarily, and not here on earth anymore, but eternally with him. We'll have that opportunity, that great thing to look forward to. So in the light of this terrible scene, in the middle of this awful sounding news, stands a light, right? In the middle of this darkness, right? All the lights had faded, comes a new light, and that is Jesus. And he brings good news, and he gathers his elect, and he makes them his, fully his, forever.